Let's sew a cute flat teddy. I'm Narelle from Threadistry. Here's what you'll need. We'll need some fabric for the body. I'm using Minky. You'll need less than a fat quarter. Then the pattern templates, they're available to download from threadistry.com. I'll provide a link in the show notes. We'll need embroidery thread for the face. I like to use a tone on tone, so it's just slightly darker than the fabric. And then we need sew-all thread, just normal sewing machine thread, a fabric marker, and some scissors, and optionally a rotary cutter and a mat. I find that that's much easier for cutting the Minky. And one thing that I didn't show here is fibre fill or polyfill, or whatever your preferred stuffing is for the teddy bear. This Minky fabric has nap, so if you brush it up, it stands up, and if you brush it down, it flattens. I'll need to take care that I cut the fabric so that the nap flattens going from top to bottom of the teddy bear. So now it's time to cut out my pattern pieces. I've got my fabric folded in half with right sides together. It's much easier to cut Minky from the wrong side. It's the same with fur, I find. So I will need 2 body pieces, so 1 set mirrored, and then 2 sets of mirrored arms, legs and ears, so that you'll have 4 each of those pieces. So let's get cutting. Next we'll transfer our pattern markings for the ears, arms and legs positioning, and also for the face. For the face, I like to poke holes in the face lines with quite a thick needle to create little holes. So you can just see the little holes that I've made in the paper, and we'll be transferring this to the right side of one of the body pieces. And then I just use a washable marker and colour in some dots through those holes that I've just made. And then I'll just colour over them to make sure that I can definitely see them. There we go. To embroider the face, I like to use 6 strands of embroidery floss. I find that gives a nice thickness to stand out for the face. So I've just tied a knot in the end of my thread, and I'm just going to do some back stitching. And I'll just tie a knot after each piece of the face. You don't want the whole face unraveling if you break a thread. And we'll finish embroidering the rest of the face. The next step is to sew around the outside of the legs, the arms, and the ears. I'll do this on my sewing machine. And because I'm using Minky, I've put in lots of pins. And I'm using a 1/4 inch seam allowance and a walking foot to make it easier to sew this Minky. I've started with a back stitch or a locking stitch, and I'll just sew around, leaving that one end open for stuffing. There we go. And I'll repeat that for all those other pieces. So here they are, all nicely stitched around the outside. The next step is to turn them right side out. Depending on your fabric, you may need to clip your curves before you turn them right side out, but I find with Minky and this small seam allowance, it's not really necessary. Next, we'll just lightly stuff each of the pieces with a small amount of polyfill or fiberfill, or your preferred stuffing material. Just like to give them a little bit of soft squishiness. Taking the ears, arms and legs, we'll line them up to the pattern markings on the front body piece, putting right sides together. So I'll line up the two edges and then we'll need to manipulate those curves a little bit to line up the centers as well with the edges of the fabric, because we've got an outside curve and an inside curve that we're looking to match up. It can be a little bit tricky. So we'll repeat that with the other ear and the arms and legs. And we'll take this to the sewing machine to baste stitch those pieces into place. So we're just using a longer than normal stitch and stitching just inside that 1/4 inch seam allowance. So those pieces are now nicely secured into place. So with right sides together, we'll place the back piece on top of the front piece, lining up all the edges and making sure the ears, arms and legs are tucked in. And we'll put lots of pins around this to keep everything in position. Don't want that minky sliding around. You'll also need to manipulate around the ears, legs and arms to get those curves to match, because those extra pieces will naturally want to pull the fabric in. So I like to start by pinning where the head joins the body. And then lining up lots of pins around the edges. So there we have it all pinned. So now we're going to stitch all the way around and leaving a small gap in the bottom. I prefer to leave it between the legs. So I've marked using 2 pins and a cross to show where I want to stop stitching to make sure I leave that gap. It's nothing worse than accidentally stitching the gap closed. So I'll start by sewing from that yellow pin, which is just at one of the legs, all the way around and stopping, leaving that opening, using a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and starting and ending with a locking stitch or a back stitch. And I've just got to where those pins are in a cross, so I'll know that's where I need to stop stitching and sew another back stitch or locking stitch. So there's that gap for turning it right sides out. Before you turn it, you'll want to make a quick snip of the seam allowance just where the head meets the body in those two little corners, and you may want to trim and clip the curves. I don't find that's really necessary with Minky, so I'll just turn this one right side out, smoothing out all those seams to get those nice curves. Now it's time to stuff him. Now it's designed to be quite a flat toy, so you only need a little bit. Break up the polyfill and shove it in. Making sure to get into all those corners so he's nice and fluffy all the way around. I like to do the cuddle and squish test to make sure he's the right level of cuddliness. And then add just a little bit more stuffing to allow it to compress a little bit. And then it's time to close up that gap. So we'll just grab some a hand sewing needle and some thread, and we'll stitch a ladder stitch so that it's nice and hidden. There's a knot in the end of the thread, and I've just used the thread doubled over. So I'll just sew back and forth, going under the seam allowance so that the stitches are invisible. I'll just tie a knot in my thread once I've finished, and then I poke the needle through the bear and out to bury the tail inside the teddy bear. And there we have a nice closed up gap and a super soft cuddly teddy bear.